For over 50 years, I cherished the memory of my soldier husband, lived a life of quiet devotion as a widow and mother. In my 90s, desperate for connection, I fell deeply in love with a compassionate online suitor, sending him my life savings to build a future together. My dream shattered when my daughter revealed the man was a fictionist scammer who stole not just my money, but my last hope for love. The lightning strike, you never forget the weather on the day your life begins. It was a Saturday in May 1953, and the sky over Cedar Falls was the kind of blue they put on postcards, endless, clean, and scented with lilac from the bushes crowding the church steps. I stood in the little back room of St. Mary's, my fingers pressed against the cold window pane, my heart doing a wild, syncopated rhythm against my ribs. My dress wasn't anything from a magazine. It was my mother's, altered to fit my younger, slimmer frame, simple ivory satin that whispered when I moved. But when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a borrowed dress. I saw a woman about to step into the sun. And then there was Tom, my Thomas Riley. He was waiting for me at the end of that short aisle, tall and straight as a young oak in his army uniform, his hat tucked under his arm. But it was his face. Oh, his face. From 30 feet away, I could see it, that smile. It wasn't just a smile. It was a complete transformation. It started in his eyes, a crinkling at the corners that held a universe of quiet joy, then spread to his mouth, wide and unreserved, as if his happiness was too big to be contained. It was a smile that promised mornings and comfort and a lifetime of shared jokes in a warm kitchen. It was a smile that said, "I see you, Evelyn Marie. Shaw, and you are my whole world." The organ swelled. My father's arm was firm in mine, but all sound faded, all sight blurred except for him. It felt less like walking and more like being drawn by a magnet pulled toward my true north. As I got closer, I saw the seriousness beneath the joy in his eyes, that sober, weighty look he got when he talked about duty, about serving. It was the part of him that made my love for him feel vast and important. I wasn't just marrying a boy. I was marrying a man who believed in something bigger than himself. Our fingers touched as I reached his side, and a current, pure and bright, shot through me. His hand was warm, slightly rough, and it held mine like I was something precious and fragile. The priest spoke, the words flowing around us to have and to hold from this day forward. But we were in our own private bubble. When it was time for our vows, his voice didn't shake. It was low, steady, and each word landed in my soul like a stone meant to build a foundation. I, Thomas, take you, Evelyn, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. He said death with a faint, almost imperceptible flinch, a shadow that crossed his sunlit face for a fraction of a second. He was shipping out in a week. Korea was a word we didn't say, a cold spot on the globe we tried not to touch. We focused on the love and to cherish. We built our whole world on those 4 words. My turn. I, Evelyn, take you, Thomas. My voice trembled, but it was from a joy so intense it bordered on pain. I poured every hope, every dream, every ounce of my 20-year-old heart into that promise. When I finished, the smile he gave me then, it was like being handed the sun. The kiss was brief, chaste by today's standards, but it sealed everything. It tasted of promise and a faint, reassuring trace of his peppermint gum. The reception was a blur of punch cake and well wishes in the church basement. But I remember one moment crystal clear. We'd slipped away just for a minute to the quiet space behind the building. He pulled me close, his uniform buttons pressing into my chest, his chin resting on top of my head. "You're my home now, Evie," he whispered. into my hair, his voice thick. No matter where I go, you're the place I'm coming back to. I looked up at him, clutching the rough wool of his jacket. Then come back fast, Tom Riley. This home isn't any good without you in it. He kissed my forehead. 7 months, maybe less. And then it's you and me. A proper house, maybe. A little noise in it. He winked, and I blushed, understanding his meaning, a secret thrill coursing through me. That was the lightning strike. It wasn't just love. It was a total, glorious annihilation of the person I was before. The shy librarian's assistant was gone, and in her place was Mrs. Evelyn Riley, a woman connected to a great and passionate love, a woman who would have a soldier's heart beating in time with her own across an ocean. We had 7 months of letters, each one a treasure, ink on paper that carried his soul, and we had that one precious. Furlough 3 days in a borrowed apartment in Chicago, where we played house with a desperate, aching intensity. That's when Sarah was made, in the quiet dark of our third and final night, his hand resting on my still flat stomach as we drifted towards sleep. He'd said, "Something feels different. Something started." He was right. He left the next morning at dawn. I stood at the train station, wrapped in his oversized coat, waving until his face was a speck and then gone. I didn't know it then, but I was already holding on to 2 things, the beginning of our child and the end of our everything. I walked back to my life, my secret nestled warm and low inside me, a living piece of him to hold on to while I waited for my husband to come home and make our family whole. That blue sky day, that smile, that kiss, that whisper. It was the brightest, most real thing that ever happened to me. For the next 72 years, I would measure every joy, every pain, every quiet moment against the seismic shift of that day. It was the pinnacle, and though I didn't know it yet, it was the standard against which all other light would fail, leaving me forever yearning for a warmth that had vanished with a train's whistle into the morning fog. The telegram the world after Tom left was painted in shades of waiting. It was a peculiar kind of time, both. Suspended and racing forward, my body began to change, a soft, secret rounding beneath my smocks that was my constant physical connection to him. I'd place my hand there as I read his letters, tracing the words with my fingers as if he were touching me through the paper. His letters were my oxygen. They came on thin, blue airmail paper that crackled with distance. He wrote of the alien landscapes, the bitter cold that stole your breath, the other men in his unit who showed him. Pictures of their own sweethearts. But mostly he wrote of home, of my cornbread, of the sound of rain on the roof of our future house, of the way I drinkle my nose when I laughed. "I'm building that house in my head, plank by plank, Evie," he wrote in one. "You're in every room, and there's a crib by the window in the sun." I wrote to him every single day, pages filled with the mundane poetry of a life waiting to be lived. Mrs. Henderson's cat had kittens. I'd finally mastered her mother's pie crust. The lilacs by the porch were especially potent this spring. I told him about the flutter I thought I felt, like a tiny moth beating its wings inside me. I sewed little gowns, my stitches careful and loving. We were building that house together, him with his memories in the frozen mud, me with my thread and hope in a sunlit chair. Then the letters slowed, a week between them. Then, too, the official line was postal delays, and I clung to that, a desperate life raft in a suddenly choppy sea. I'd stand at the window for hours, watching for the postman, my hand resting on the now definite curve of my belly. The baby was active, especially in the evenings. "That's your daddy's spirit," I'd whisper, rubbing the spot where a heel or elbow pressed out. "He's restless to get home to us." The silence grew heavier, a thick wool blanket smothering the house. The fear, which had been a small, cold pebble in my shoe, became a boulder in my chest. I stopped sleeping. I'd sit in the rocking chair he'd bought me just before he left, the one for rocking the baby, and I'd stare at his photograph on the mantel, the formal one. In his uniform, not quite smiling, his eyes looking straight into a future he believed in. The day it came, I knew. The postman didn't just drop it in the box. He walked up the path, his steps slow, his face a careful blank. He held not the familiar blue envelope, but a smaller, official-looking one. His eyes wouldn't meet mine as he handed it over. "Mrs. Riley," he said, his voice gravelly. He tipped his hat and walked away quickly, as if escaping a contagion. I stood on the porch, the wood warm beneath my feet, the lilac scent suddenly cloying. The world was too bright, too sharp. I could hear a child laughing down the street, a screen door slam. Normal life happening just beyond the event horizon of the paper in my hand. I didn't open it inside. I couldn't let that thing into our space. Into the nursery I'd painted a soft yellow. I sank onto the top step, my back against the porch column, my swollen belly making the movement awkward. My fingers were numb as I tore the flap. The words were typed, impersonal, a brutal machine gun burst of letters. The Secretary of the War Department desires me to express his deep regret that your husband, Private First Class Thomas James Riley, has been reported missing in action since December 14th. If further details or other information are received, you will be promptly notified. Missing. The paper rattled in my hands. Missing was not a word. It was a void. It was a door left swinging open in a blizzard. It was a question mark etched onto a tombstone. It was not yes and it was not no. It was the excruciating, eternal pause between heartbeats. I read it again and again. The words wouldn't assemble into meaning. Thomas. James Riley, missing. My Tom. My smiling, plank by plank, crib by the window Tom. Gone into a word. Missing. A sound came out of me, not a scream, but a low animal groan, ripped from a place deeper than my soul. I folded over my belly, the telegram crushed against my stomach where his child kicked, a frantic, innocent rhythm against the silence of its father. They presumed him dead months later. Another piece of paper. This one used the word killed, but it was the first one, the one with missing, that truly did it. Killed was a full stop. Missing was an ellipsis, a trail of breadcrumbs that led into a dark, endless forest. It allowed for a ghost of a chance. It forced me to imagine 1,000 hells captured, wounded, alone, suffering instead of one clean, horrible end. For years, decades, a part of me remained on that porch step, waiting. Every knock on the door, every ring of the phone, every sight of a tall, broad-shouldered man from behind, that part of me would snap to attention. Could it be? Hope, I learned, is the most tenacious of weeds. It grows in the cracks of utter devastation, fueled by nothing but sheer, desperate need. I gave birth to Sarah 4 months after the telegram, in a room that felt emptier than space. They laid her on my chest, a squalling, red-faced miracle with a furious grip. She had his eyes, the exact, serious, clear blue. She looked at me, and in that newborn gaze I saw the shadow of his smile. It was the most beautiful and the most devastating thing I had ever seen. I was 35 years old, a widow with a newborn. My husband was a word on a telegram, a memory in a uniform, a phantom limb I would feel for every single day for the rest of my life. The house we were meant to build together became a solitary fortress, and I, its lone guardian, learned to tend the ghost of a lightning strike forever, listening for a thunder that would never come again, the monuments of silence. The silence after the telegram wasn't an empty one. It was a dense, living thing. It had texture. It was the sound of the furnace kicking on in the middle of the night, a jarring, metallic sigh. It was the relentless tick of the mantel clock Tom's parents had given us, measuring out a future that had vanished. It was the hollow echo of my own footsteps in the apartment to rooms that felt cavernous with only a ghost and a baby to fill them. That's what I did. I filled them, not with noise, but with monuments. Sarah was my first and greatest monument, a living memorial to a love that had lasted less than a year of actual marriage. Every diaper I changed, every AM feeding in the blue glow of the streetlight, every fever I cooled with a washcloth, it was an act of devotion to him. I'd look into her serious blue eyes, so like his, and whisper, "We're doing this for Daddy. We're being brave." I was talking to her, to myself, and to the photograph on the dresser. The silence demanded these rituals. It demanded proof that he had existed, that his love had tangible, lasting form. My love for her was a furious, frightened thing. It was the only bridge across the abyss of my grief. If I poured everything into her, I wouldn't have anything left to feel the howling emptiness. So I poured. I took the job at the library during the day, shelving books with a mechanical precision, the quiet of the stacks a pale imitation of the quiet at home. At night, I typed addresses for a mail-order company, my fingers tapping a staccato rhythm on the keys while Sarah slept in a drawer I'd padded and placed beside the desk. The click-clack of the typewriter was another small monument, a sound of survival. Money was a tight, nervous knot in my stomach. Tom's pension was a pittance, a government's cold calculation of a life's value. I learned to stretch $1 until it screamed. A single chicken simmered into a week's worth of soup. Darned socks became a point of pride, not poverty. Every penny saved was a brick in the wall I was building. Around Sarah, a wall to keep the world's pity and the cold away. I kept a ledger in a small black book. On one side, expenses, milk, bread, rent, coal. On the other, a column I never showed anyone. Sarah's shoes, Sarah's school trip, Sarah's future. That was the real ledger. My life was the cost, and her stability was the balance. And there were other smaller monuments. The way I kept his shaving brush on the sink in its mug, the bristles long since dry and stiff. The single ugly armchair he'd loved, threadbare and sagging, which I could never bring myself to royfulster. It held the shape of him. I'd sit in it sometimes, very still, trying to feel the echo of his warmth in the fabric. The world outside moved on. Men came home from other wars. Women my age remarried, had more children, their lives expanding like ripples in a pond. My life became a series of careful, concentric circles drawn tightly around one small girl and one large memory. I was invited to dinners, to socials at the church, well-meaning friends. Their voices, hushed with a sympathy that curdled into awkwardness, would say, "Tom would want you to be happy, Evelyn, or worse, he's in a better place." I'd smile, a tight, practiced curve of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. What did they know of the better place? The better place was here in this shabby apartment with his child on my hip and the ghost of his laugh in the air. Happiness wasn't a destination to move toward. It was a country I'd been exiled from, its borders permanently closed. Once, when Sarah was about 10, a kind man from the library, a widower himself, asked if he could take me to a picture show. He had gentle eyes and spoke softly of books. For a fleeting second, I felt the faint, foreign stir of possibility. Then I looked at him, and I saw not his face, but the absence of Tom's. I saw a future that would require me to dismantle my monuments, to pack away the shaving brush, to finally admit that the armchair was just a chair. It felt like a betrayal so profound it stole my breath. "Thank you, Charles," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I'm already spoken for." He nodded, understanding nothing and everything, and never asked again. That was the truth of it. I was spoken for. My heart had been signed, sealed, and delivered in 1953. The silence in my life wasn't a lack of sound. It was the space where his voice used to be. Every action, every sacrifice, every lonely night was a stone laid in the quiet cathedral I was building to our love. Sarah was the spire. My frugality was the foundation. My loneliness was the incense always burning. I became a curator of a museum of one. The artifacts were a ribbon from my wedding bouquet, a stack of blue letters tied with string, a pair of tiny baby shoes, a ledger of debts paid, and the central exhibit always was our daughter, a living, breathing, brilliant monument to a man who left for war and became forever missing. The whirlwind daughter, watching Sarah grow, was like witnessing a magic trick in reverse. Instead of a rabbit disappearing into a hat, I saw the quiet, serious-eyed baby transform, right before me, into a force of nature. The silence I had cultivated, the careful museum of my life, became the perfect vacuum for her sound and motion to fill. She was a hummingbird from the start, not just active-driven. Where other children dawdled, she marched. Where they babbled, she formulated arguments. Her questions weren't childish wise. They were cross-examinations. What is the evidence for that, Mother? She might ask at 8 after I'd said it would rain. She'd check the barometer her grandfather had given her, a frown of concentration on her face that was so like Thomas it made my heart ache. She absorbed my love not as a gentle rain but as fuel. I had poured everything into her, and she metabolized it into ambition. Straight A's weren't good enough. They were the baseline. Debates, student council, editor of the school paper. She collected achievements like some girls collected charm bracelets. I'd sit in the audience at her speeches, my hands clenched in my lap, bursting with a pride so fierce it was almost painful. Look, Tom, look at her. She has your mind, your conviction. But with every trophy won, every scholarship awarded, she stepped further from the quiet world of our apartment. My monuments of silence became things she had to outgrow. The mended socks embarrassed her by high school. The humble, steadfast casseroles I made were fine, Mother, but she dreamed of restaurants with names she clipped. From magazines, my love, which had been her entire universe, became the launch pad from which she was determined to blast off, and blast off she did. Northwestern University, then law school, Chicago. Each departure was a tectonic shift. The first time she left for college, I stood in her empty room, the silence rushing back in, now deafening without the constant soundtrack of her typing or her music. It smelled of her perfume and absence. I smoothed the coverlet on her bed, a monument now to a ghost of a different kind. Her success was my solace and my sentence. She became a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the kind whose name was on the door of a glass and steel tower. She spoke a new language of litigation and mergers and asset management. When she called, her voice had a new cadence, crisp and efficient, often underscored by the clicking of a keyboard. "I'm so proud of you, honey," I'd say, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet kitchen. "Thanks, Mom. Listen, I've got a conference call in too. Did the cleaning service come? Is the grocery delivery okay?" She provided. Oh, how she provided. My frugal ledger became obsolete. She replaced my ancient stove with a sleek glass top model that beeped at me accusingly. She hired a service that came and whisked away dust I hadn't even seen, leaving the house smelling of chemical lemons, erasing the comfortable, lived-in scent of my life. She sent a robotic vacuum that bumped mournfully into chair legs, a lonely little satellite orbiting my empty rooms. Her visits were events. She'd arrive in a whirlwind of tailored suits and expensive luggage, her phone practically grafted to her ear. She'd bring gifts, a cashmere wrap too fine for my simple furniture, a digital picture frame that cycled through photos of skyscrapers and fancy meals I hadn't shared. They were gifts of guilt, I knew, and love all tangled together. We'd have one, maybe two dinners where she'd try to put her phone away, but her eyes would dart to it, restless, called by the urgent, important world that needed her. And I would try to shrink my life into anecdotes fit for her consumption. I deaded out the long, empty afternoons, the small pains in my joints, the way I sometimes talked to Tom's photograph. I'd serve the casserole anyway, and she'd eat it, complimenting it, but I could see her mind was on a brief, on a client, on a flight the next morning. The goodbye was always the same, a firm, fragrant hug, a kiss. On my cheek. I'll call Sunday, Mom. Promise. Take care of yourself. Use the services I set up. And then she'd be gone, the roar of her rental car engine fading down the street, leaving a silence deeper and more profound than before. The house would settle around me. The digital frame would click to a photo of her, triumphant on a mountaintop somewhere without me. The robot vacuum would sigh into its dock. I'd wrap the cashmere around my shoulders, its softness feeling alien. My daughter, my greatest monument, my living masterpiece, had become a breathtakingly beautiful visitor in the museum of my life. She curated my comfort from a distance, managed my solitude with efficiency, and loved me with a fierce, busy protectiveness that could fill my bank account but couldn't quite fill the long, quiet spaces between her Sunday calls. I was so proud it cracked my heart wide open, and in the fissures, the old loneliness, patient and abiding, would gently seep back in. The blue light loneliness, I discovered, is not a hollow. It is a fullness that has nowhere to go. For decades, the love I had was a directed thing, a beam focused entirely on Sarah. But Sarah had grown into a brilliant, self-sufficient star in a faraway galaxy, shining her light on spreadsheets and courtrooms. The love I still carried, the love for Tom, the vast, surplus love of a mother whose child no longer needs holding, had become a weight in my chest. It sat there, pooling like water with no outlet, becoming stagnant. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of my living room. The days were long and soft at the edges, a series of identical hours marked by the pills in my weekly dispenser. The programs on the television I barely watched, and the kind, brisk visits from the home health aide Sarah insisted upon. I was a well-tended ghost in my own home. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of me, echoing. Then came the tablet. Sarah had given it to me 2 Christmases ago, her face bright with the promise of technology. It'll help you stay connected, Mom. You can see pictures of my trip in real time. We can video call. You can read all the books you want. It was a slab of cold, dark glass that felt alien in my parchment-thin hands. I'd used it dutifully for our video calls, my face a pale moon in the little square, while her image sometimes froze mid-sentence, a pixelated smile. I'd tap at the library app, but the glow of the screen hurt my eyes, and the silence around me only seemed deeper when illuminated by its blue light. It was on one of those silent afternoons, the rain tracing lazy paths down the window pane, that I stumbled into the book club forum, a place for historical fiction lovers, it said, a small, safe world. I'd typed a few sentences about a novel I'd just finished, one set during the War of 1812. I wrote about the loneliness of the wives left behind, the agony of waiting for news that came by horseback instead of telegram. I tapped post, the action feeling strangely brave, and set the tablet down, the silence rushing back. The notification chime, when it came, made me jump, a little red bubble over the message icon. My heart stupidly gave a little flutter. It had been so long since a message was for me, and not a reminder from a pharmacy or an advertisement. I opened it. "Dear Evelyn," it began, a stranger using my name, but it wasn't harsh. "I just read your review of The Captain's Wife. You captured the essence of it so beautifully, that quiet, desperate fortitude. It's the strength that holds the world together while the men are off making history, isn't it? I was moved. I read it 3 times. The words were simple, but they saw me. They saw the feeling I had tried to articulate, the one that lived in my bones. He'd used my name. He'd called my thought beautiful. His profile name was James P. 67. I clicked on it. His picture loaded slowly. A man with kind eyes, genuinely kind. They crinkled at the corners in a way that suggested a lifetime of smiling, not scowling. His hair was a distinguished silver, swept back from a tall forehead. He wore a cable-knit sweater. He looked like someone who might putter in a garden, who might know how to fix a loose cabinet door. He looked gentle. His message wasn't flirty. It was thoughtful. It was about the book, about history, about the human cost of distance. I found myself typing a reply, then another. He wrote back that evening. He was a retired engineer from Seattle, a widower. His wife had passed 6 years ago from cancer. He had a daughter who lived in London. They were close, but the distance was hard. He missed having someone to share the small things with, the way the light hit the water in the afternoon. The stubborn robin that nested in his eaves every spring. He asked about my roses. I'd mentioned them once, my pathetic patio pots where I battled daphids and black spot. He knew what black spot was. He suggested a homemade remedy of baking soda and soap. Our conversations became the new punctuation of my days, not the chime of a pill. Reminder, but the gentle ping of a message from James. Good morning, Evelyn. The mist is hanging low over the sound today. It looks like a dream. I hope your day is gentle. He'd send a picture, hazy and soft. In return, I'd send a photo of the stubborn rosebud finally opening, its petals edged in pink. The blue light of the tablet, which had felt so cold, began to emit a warmth. It was the glow of a shared secret, a private conversation in the public quiet of my house. I'd find myself smiling at the screen. A forgotten reflex. I'd carry the tablet from room to room, not wanting to miss a message. The love that had been pooling inside me, stagnant and heavy, began to stir. It found a current. It began to flow tentatively through the cables and satellites toward a pair of crinkled, kind eyes in Seattle. The silence was still there, but now it was different. It was no longer an empty room. It was the quiet space between notes in a melody, the anticipatory pause before a dear friend speaks. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence felt like it was waiting with me, not just for me. And in that blue light, I began to feel, not like a monument, but like a woman again, the kindling. It started with the weather. Then it became the weather inside me. James's messages were never demanding. They were like the careful, patient strokes of a man tending a fire in a damp wood. A little kindling each day, a sheltering of hands against a wind that might snuff it out. Good morning, Evelyn. I see you're up early. The dew on your rose leaves in that photo you sent was like scattered diamonds. He'd noticed the time stamp. He'd noticed the dew. No one had paid that kind of attention to the minutiae of my existence in. I couldn't remember how long. I found myself composing my days for him, not in a dishonest way, but with a new layer of consciousness. The morning light slanting across the kitchen table wasn't just light. It was a potential description. The stubborn cardinal at the feeder wasn't just a bird. It was a character in our shared narrative. I'd take a picture with the tablet, my hands trembling slightly, trying to capture the essence of the moment to send to him. My world, which had felt so small and worn smooth by routine, suddenly held new textures, new angles of interest, because I had someone to show them to. He remembered everything. If I mentioned on a Tuesday that My arthritis in my right hand was making knitting difficult. He'd ask about it on Thursday. "How's the commander-in-chief of the knitting needles today?" He'd write. He called it that, the commander-in-chief. It made me laugh, a rusty, unfamiliar sound in the quiet house. He shared his own small relics, a photo of a perfectly frothy latte he'd made, the pattern in the foam delicate as lace, a page from a first edition engineering textbook he'd found in a used bookstore, the margins filled with elegant, outdated calculations. The view from his favorite reading chair, a window overlooking a sliver of gray-blue water, an evergreen branch framing the scene. He was building a window for me into his life, and I was leaning in, my breath fogging the glass. We talked of loss, but not with the heavy, suffocating tones I was used to. It was spoken of as a shared country we both hailed from, a place that had shaped our accents. It leaves a silence, doesn't it? He wrote one evening, not just in the house, but in the conversations. There are all these things you learn, these observations you make, and you turn to share them. And the chair is empty. Tears had sprung to my eyes. Yes, that was it exactly, the empty chair. I had been talking to the empty chair for 57 years. But perhaps his next message came. The purpose of a new friend isn't to fill the old chair. Maybe it's to pull up a new one beside it, so the silence has company. The poetry of that idea undid me. He wasn't asking me to dismantle my monuments. He wasn't demanding I forget Tom. He was offering to sit in the quiet museum with me and appreciate what was there. The respect in that gesture was a hotter, brighter flame than any youthful passion could have been. He began to call me my dear Evelyn. The possessive, the endearment, they didn't feel rushed or presumptuous. They felt turned. They felt like a blanket being tucked around my shoulders after a long chill. I dread those 3 words on the screen, and a warmth would spread from my core to the very tips of my fingers, thawing a cold I had stopped noticing I lived with. The blue light of the tablet was no longer just a screen. It was a hearth. I'd sit with it in the evenings, the rest of the house dark, its glow painting my lined hands. And attentive face. The digital picture frame Sarah had given me cycled silently nearby images of her success, her distant adventures. But my attention, my whole being, was focused on this gentle, unfolding conversation. It was a slow, tender dance of 2 souls revealing themselves layer by layer, finding a mirrored loneliness in each other, and in that reflection, seeing the possibility of light. The kindling was catching. A steady golden heat was beginning to burn. Where only ashes and memory had been for so long, it wasn't a roaring blaze. It was the perfect, sustainable fire for a woman in her winter one that promised not to consume. But too warm for as long as the fuel of care and attention lasted. And for the first time in a lifetime, I believed I had fuel to give. The miracle the word arrived on a Thursday. An ordinary Thursday of weak tea and the soft drone of the midday news. I was watching a sparrow take a dust bath in the flower bed, thinking of how to describe the funny, earnest little shudders of its body to James when the tablet chimed. It was a longer message. I could see the block of text, dense and waiting. My heart, that ancient, weary organ, gave a small, hopeful knock against my ribs. I settled my glasses, the ritual feeling sacred. My dear Evelyn, it began, as always. But the words that followed were not about mist or roses or books. I must tell you something, and I find myself uncharacteristically nervous. A retired engineer should have better command of his words, but here I am, fumbling like a schoolboy. When Margaret passed, I believed the book of my heart had been closed. The final chapter written. I tended my garden. I spoke to my daughter across an ocean. I found solace in equations and the predictable turn of the seasons. I made a peace of sorts with the quiet. Then I met you, or rather, I read your words, and it was as if someone had left a window open in a musty room I hadn't realized was airless. You speak of loneliness not as a void, but as a presence. You see history not as dry facts, but as the beating hearts of people who loved and waited. You find beauty in a single rose battling black spot. You have a quiet courage that humbles me. Evelyn, in these past months you have done the impossible. You have made me hope again, not for grand things, but for the profound simplicity of sharing a sunrise with someone who understands its worth, for comparing notes on the birds at the feeder, for the peace of a silence that is companionable, not empty. I find I am in love with you. I know how this must sound. The practical world would call it foolish. Two people of our age, separated by a continent connecting through a screen. But the heart has its own logic, its own geography, and my heart has found its true north in you. You are a miracle I had stopped believing in. I stopped breathing. The words on the screen blurred, swam, then snapped back into a sharp, terrifying clarity. I find I am in love with you. They were not words from my world. My world was one of stoic endurance, of cherished memory, of practical care. My world had rules. You love once with a lightning strike, and you spend a lifetime tending the scorched earth it left behind. Romantic love was a language spoken in a foreign film, melodramatic and distant. But this was not the fevered passion of youth. It was a declaration built on shared solitude, on the recognition of cracks in each other's armor, and the gentle desire to bridge them. It was a love letter written in the language of sunsets and arthritis and the comfort of being truly seen. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I had ever read. My hands shook. I set the tablet down as if it had grown teeth. I walked to the window, but I didn't see the sparrow. I saw Tom smile. I felt the old familiar guilt rise like bile. Was this betrayal? To let this new gentle warmth into the shrine I had kept for him? But then I heard James's voice in my head from a week before. The purpose of a new friend isn't to fill the old chair. Maybe it's to pull up a new one beside it. I wasn't replacing Tom. I was adding. My heart, which I believed had atrophied into a museum piece, was beating a wild, frantic rhythm against my breastbone. It was still capable of this. At 92, it could still flutter and soar. I picked the tablet back up. I read the message again and again. Each time the words sank deeper, past the layers of widow and mother and lonely old woman, to the core of me that was simply Evelyn, a woman who was being called beloved. Tears came then, not the sharp, grieving tears for Tom, but a soft, bewildered rain of release. They pattered onto the screen, blurring the words, "You are a miracle." I wiped them away with a trembling thumb. For so long I had been the caretaker, the strong one, the monument to be called a miracle. It was an absolution. It was a benediction. I didn't know how to reply. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. All my words felt too small, too worn. How could I match such a vulnerability? I typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, I simply let the truth flow raw and unadorned. James, my hands are shaking. I have read your words a dozen times. You speak of miracles. You are one, to be seen by you, to be understood. I had forgotten what that felt like. My heart is a room that has been dark for so long, and you have little amp in it. I am afraid, but I am also more alive than I have been in decades. Yes, my answer is yes. I hit send before I could think, before the practical world, Sarah's world, could crash in and call it foolish. And then I waited, the tablet dark in my lap. The silence of the house was no longer a passive thing. It was charged, electric, like the air before a summer storm. I was a girl again, waiting for a reply to a love letter. I was a woman at the end of my life, standing on the precipice of a beginning. When his reply came, it was only 3 words. My dear, dear Evelyn. And in that repetition, that doubling of the endearment, I felt it. The shift, the world had realigned. The story I had believed was long finished had just discovered a new, impossible, glorious chapter. The miracle wasn't just him. It was the fact that I, Evelyn Riley, at 92, could still believe in it. The first hurdle. The world after the miracle was painted in watercolors. Everything seemed softer, edged with a light I hadn't noticed before. Even the stubborn ache in my knees felt like a distant murmur, drowned out by the new humming song in my veins. We began to build our tomorrow with words. They were the bricks and mortar of our shared future. He spoke of selling his condo. The market was good, he said. He'd use the proceeds to buy a little place here in Cedar Falls, somewhere with a yard for a proper garden, a sunroom for reading. I want to wake up and hear the same birds you do, Evelyn, he wrote. I want to learn the rhythm of your days. We planned with the meticulous, hopeful detail of teenagers. We'd be married in the fall at St. Mary's, of course, a small service. Sarah would give me away. His daughter would fly in from London. We'd serve lemon cake and punch in the fellowship hall just like before. Then we'd take a trip, not a honeymoon, that word felt too youthful, too blush-colored for us. A first adventure, he called it. To the Oregon coast to see the Pacific Ocean. I had never seen an ocean. Tom and I had dreamed of the Gulf. He'd promised me warm green waters. The Pacific, James said, was wilder, grander, a proper metaphor for a love found in life's winter. I'd sit for hours, his messages open before me, tracing the words with my eyes, building the house, planning the journey, living a double life, one in my quiet chair and one in the vibrant future glowing on the screen. Then the first cloud drifted across our sun-drenched blueprint. It came subtly. He was quieter for a day, his usual. Morning greeting was late, and when it came, it lacked its customary spark. Good morning, my dear. A bit of a headache today. The world feels heavy. I wrote back immediately, full of concern. Was he ill? Had he slept? No, no, just the worries of an old man, he replied. The sale of the condo. There's a complication. The buyer's financing hit a last-minute snag. It's nothing, I'm sure. Just a delay. But it ties up my capital. And there are fees, always fees. I feel foolish even mentioning it. My heart, so newly tuned to his frequencies, clenched in sympathy. Of course there were fees. The world was built on them. Don't worry, I typed, the caretaker in me rising instantly. These things happen. It will sort itself out. You're my rock, he wrote back, and the words filled me with a fierce, protective pride. It's just a temporary hurdle, a few $1,000s to bridge the gap with the lawyers, keep everything moving forward. I hate to ask. I feel so ashamed. The word ask hung in the digital space between us. It was the first fissure in the perfect dream. I have some savings. I found myself typing before I could think. It was true. Tom's life insurance, carefully shepherded over a lifetime of frugality. It was for emergencies, for my final care, for Sarah if she ever needed it. But wasn't this an emergency? The emergency of a delayed happiness, the care of our shared future. No, my love, I couldn't possibly, he protested. This is my burden. But his protest felt like part of a dance, a delicate step of reluctance I was meant to overcome. It proved he wasn't a gold digger, that he was a proud man in a temporary bind. My desire to help, to be his partner in this practical way, surged. It would make our future ours, built not just on words, but on a tangible act of faith. "Let me help," I wrote, my fingers firm on the keys. "It's not a burden if we share it. That's what we're going to do, isn't it? Share everything?" There was a long pause. Then his message appeared. "You are too good to me, a saint. This is why I love you." It would just be a loan, of course. The very second the sale clears, I'll repay you with interest. We'll add it to the fund for our trip to the coast. He made it sound like a joint investment, a small temporary pooling of resources for our common goal. It felt practical, even wise. How much? I typed, the numbers in my black ledger book flashing in my mind. 5,000 would see everything through, he wrote. Then, quickly, but only if it's absolutely no trouble. I'd rather sell my watch than cause you a moment's stress. $5,000. It was a significant sum, but weighed against a lifetime of loneliness, against the promise of a sunroom and the sound of the Pacific. It was nothing. It was the cost of a key to unlock the rest of my life. "It's no trouble," I wrote, the decision solidifying as I formed the words. "Tell me where to send it." The process of wiring the money was complicated. I had to call the bank, endure the skeptical questions from a young manager who knew me as the careful widow, Riley. "It's for a family matter," I said, my voice gaining a new, unfamiliar steel. This was my matter, my family. When it was done, a strange euphoria mixed with the nerves. I had done it. I had helped my love. The hurdle was cleared. His gratitude was profuse, a shower of loving words that made my cheeks flush. "My clever, wonderful Evelyn, you've saved me, saved us. This is the last obstacle, I'm sure of it. Now, about that garden. Do you think roses would do well on the east side of the house?" We were building again. The blueprint was back, brighter than ever. The transfer of money felt less like a loss and more like a sacred vow, a tangible proof of my belief in us. It was no longer just a romance. It was a partnership. We had faced our first challenge together and triumphed the small, cold seed of worry that had been planted. The faint memory of the bank manager's furrowed brow was quickly buried under the warm, fertile soil of his promises and our renewed plans. It was, as he said, just a temporary hurdle, and I had helped him over it. That knowledge was its own kind of warmth, a new and potent fuel for the fire of our miracle. The spiral, the first wire, was a clean, singular incision. The wound, stitched with his grateful promises, healed quickly under the balm of our resumed dreaming. We were architects again, laying out flower beds for peonies, debating the merits of a gas versus a wood-burning fireplace. The $5,000 was a closed parenthesis in our love story. Then the ground softened. The path we were walking together, so solid in my mind, began to develop pockets of mud that threatened to suck us down. It happened slowly, so cleverly, that each new request felt like a reluctant revelation of our shared bad luck, not a pattern. It was the accountant, the poor man who handled his late wife's estate, who was also managing the condo sale, had a sudden heart attack. "A good man," Evelyn, James wrote, his digital voice somber, "and the chaos he's left behind. It's a legal snarl. His files are a mess. We need a new attorney just to sort it, and the retainer is substantial." I felt a pang for him for the stress. "How substantial?" I asked, the caretaker's instinct overriding a tiny new flutter of unease. "A further 10, came the reply, followed by a torrent of self-recrimination. I feel sick asking. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I wanted to be your provider, your rock. Now I feel like a millstone around your beautiful, graceful neck." His anguish was palpable. It convinced me of his sincerity. A scammer, I reasoned in the quiet of my night, would be glib, eager. James was ashamed. He was a proud man brought low by circumstance, And wasn't it my role as the woman who loved him to be his harbor in this storm? To prove that my love was not conditional on his ease? 10,000 more. I sold some of the careful bonds I'd held for decades. The transaction left a hollow feeling in my financial ledger, but I filled it with the vision he painted, the two of us. The legal mess finally behind us, toasting with a single glass of sherry in our future sunroom. But the mess had a gravity of its own. Just as that fee was paid, a new problem materialized, a tax lien. A forgotten, dormant thing from his wife's medical bills, suddenly awakened by the sale of the asset. The government is relentless, he wrote, his words tinged with a helpless fury I found utterly believable. They'll freeze everything unless it's settled. It's another 15, my love. I'm at my wit's end. 15,000. The number was a cold stone in my stomach. I walked to the hall closet, opened the safe where I kept the important papers, the deed, Tom's death certificate, Sarah's birth certificate. I pulled out the passbook for my savings account. The numbers, once a comforting monument to a lifetime of caution, were shrinking. A violent tremor started in my hands. I sat on the edge of my bed, the passbook in one hand, the tablet glowing with his plea in the other. The silence of the house felt accusatory. What are you doing, Evelyn? Then a new message chimed. It was a photo. It was him, the kind-eyed man from the profile picture, but in a hospital bed. His face was pale, one temple bruised. The message that followed was frantic, typed in a haste full of errors. Car accident, not my fault. Taxi ran a light, just banged up. But insurance is a nightmare. Deductible is huge. They won't release my car until it's paid. I'm stranded, Evie, and the medical bills are starting to arrive. I feel so vulnerable. The photo did it. The visual proof of his suffering, his palpable fear, vaporized my doubt. This was no longer about property or taxes. This was about him, his safety, his well-being. The man I loved was hurt, scared, and asking for my help. The caretaker, the widow who had nursed a ghost for half a century, roared. To life, this was a need I understood in my bones. The money became a blur after that. 5,000 here for the car. 10,000 there for the hospital to avoid collections, to keep his credit intact for when we apply for a joint mortgage, he reasoned. Each sum was a thread, he said, stitching up a tear in the fabric of our future. Each transaction was accompanied by a waterfall of loving promises, detailed plans that grew more exquisite with. Each drain on my account, the beach house we'd rent on the coast had a specific name now. The wedding vows he was writing made me weep. I stopped looking at the passbook. The numbers were just shadows. The reality was the luminous future on the screen. I was not being drained. I was being invested in. I was purchasing our happiness, one emergency at a time. The love was the constant, the proof it was all real. Would a man concocting a lie speak so tenderly of the sound of my voice on the rare occasions we managed a clumsy video call? Would he remember the name of my first childhood dog? The spiral was not a descent to me. It was an ascent, a difficult climb we were making together toward the sunlit peak of our life together. The sacrifices were the steep path. The money was the weight I was shedding to make the climb easier for us both, $45,000. It was the price of the air at the summit, and I was almost there. We were almost there. Every hurdle was surely the last. The next message would be the one telling me he was packing, that the car was fixed, the liens cleared, the condo sold. The next message would begin with, I'm on my way. I believed it with every weary, hopeful, love-starved beat of my 92-year-old heart. I had to. It was the only thing holding me aloft in the swirling current, the cost of a vessel. The final number, when I dared to glance at the sparsely scribbled note side kept in the back of my old black ledger, was $45,000. The number sat there on the lined paper, not as a wound, but as a monument of its own. A quiet, staggering sum. My lifetime of careful nose, my patched elbows and stretched meals, my quiet foregoing all of it transmuted wire by electronic wire into a singular act of yes. I did not think of it as money lost. My generation spoke of a woman's dowry, something of value she brought to a marriage to secure her place. This was my reverse dowry. I was not a young bride bringing linen and silver to a new household. I was an ancient one, pouring the copper and gold of my survival into the vessel of our shared future. I was purchasing my passage out of the silent country I had inhabited for so long. The vessel was James. His promises were its polished hull, his plans the specific shade of blue for the shutters, the type of bird seed that attracted goldfinches were its intricate carvings. His love was the sail that would catch the wind and carry me to a new shore. Each transfer, each confirmation number from the bank was a sacred ritual. I would perform the practical task with trembling hands, the voice of the bank teller or the click of the online portal a distant mundane noise. Then I would return to my tablet, to the sanctuary of our messages, and I would tell him it was done. His responses were my sacrament. The relief, the gratitude, the lavish, poetic descriptions of the life awaiting us, they were the blessing upon my offering. You are my savior, my practical angel, he'd write. When I hold you, I will kiss each finger that typed those banking details for me. We are building something unbreakable. And I believed him. The money was the tangible proof of my faith. Talk was cheap, the world said. Well, my love was not cheap. It was expensive. It had cost me decades of solitude, and now it was costing me my security. That very expense was what made it real. A scammer, I reasoned in the deep of the night when a sliver of cold doubt would sometimes pierce the warm haze, would have vanished after the first wire. James stayed. He talked more, loved more, planned more. The money deepened our intimacy, bound us in a shared, secret struggle against a cruel world of accountants and taxi drivers and faceless government agencies. My old fears of being a burden to Sarah, of my savings dwindling to nothing, were reshaped. I was not a burden. I was an investor. I was not dwindling. I was transforming my earthly treasure into a heavenly future. The loneliness that had been a cold companion was now a fuel I was burning to power my escape. I would look around my living room at the ghost-filled armchair, at the silent digital frame flashing images of a daughter too busy to visit, and I would feel no attachment. These were just waypoints, temporary shelters. My real home was being built in the Pacific Northwest, in the heart of a man who knew the secret, tender name for my loneliness. $45,000. It was the price of the vessel, and what was inside that vessel. Not just a man, but an identity. I was no longer Evelyn the widow, the museum curator of loss. I was Evelyn the beloved, the adventurer. I was a woman with a suitcase mentally packed, a woman waiting for the sound of a car in the driveway that wasn't Sarah's rental. The cost felt holy, a lifetime of quiet, stored-up value, spent in a great, glorious cascade to buy the one thing the money itself could never have purchased alone, the certainty that I was loved and that I was going somewhere. The numbers in the ledger were just ink. The future on the screen was written in light. I chose the light. I had paid for it in full. And so, with an account nearly barren and a heart impossibly full, I waited for my ship to come in, the final key. The request came on a Tuesday morning. The sky outside was the flat, pale gray of unwashed sheets. There was a heaviness in the air, a stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. My tablet chimed a sound that usually sent a jolt of warmth through me, but this time the chime felt thin, brittle. I opened his message. His words were different, stripped of their usual poetic flourishes. They were stark, efficient, tinged with a desperate exhaustion that echoed my own. My dearest Evelyn, it began, a title that now felt less like an endearment and more like a preamble. The key is in my hand, the literal physical key to the storage unit where the last of the paperwork from the condo is held. The lien is cleared, the title is clean. All of it, every last nightmare, is settled. A wave of relief so profound it was dizzying washed over me. I sank into my chair. It was over. The hurdles were behind us. I started to type a reply, my fingers fumbling with joy. Oh, James, thank God. But his message continued, the text rolling on. The storage company, however, will not release the contents, not without a final payment, a lien of their own, they call it, unpaid rent for the months this dragged on, plus exorbitant fees for administrative hold. It's legal robbery. They are holding our future hostage in a concrete box. My breath hitched. No, not again. The amount is $12,000. I have nothing left to liquidate, my love. I am tapped. I am on my knees. This is the final key, not just to the unit, but to me, to us. Pay this, and I walk out that door, get in my car, and I drive to you. No more wires, no more delays, just the open road and you at the end of it. $12,000. The number didn't feel real. It felt like a final physical barrier, a wall of thick glass erected between my chair in Cedar Falls and the passenger seat of his car. I could see him on the other side, the kind-eyed man, his hand pressed against the glass, but I couldn't reach him. I looked inward at the ruins of my finances. The careful fortress I'd built was a hollowed-out shell. $45,000 had already flowed out, a quiet hemorrhage. My checking account held enough for groceries, for utilities, for the small, sad transactions of a solitary life. My savings account, the one that had held Tom's. Legacy, Sarah's security, my own dignity showed a balance that was a polite fiction, a number that would make a bank manager frown. Panic, cold and slick, began to coil in my stomach. This couldn't be happening, not when we were so close. The storage unit was a tangible, stupid, maddening thing. I could picture it, a metal door, a padlock, our paperwork inside, our future trapped. I thought of asking him to wait, to fight it, to find another way, but his next message sealed my fate. I am at the storage facility now, in the parking lot. I can see the unit. It's Unit 214. I took a picture. A photo appeared. A grainy image of rows of identical orange garage doors, one numbered 214. It was proof. It was real. I feel like I am going to be sick, he wrote. The humiliation is absolute to be so close to. Have come so far because of your incredible heart. And to be stopped by this bureaucratic vampire. My dear Evelyn, I am so sorry. I have failed you. He had not failed. I would not let us fail. This was the test. The final, grueling, my love, the marathon. If I stopped now, it meant the last 45,000 was for nothing. It meant the loneliness had won. It meant the vessel I had paid for so dearly would sink within sight of the shore. I could not tell him I was empty. I could not admit that the well he had been drinking from was now dust. To do so would be to show him the poverty of my world, not just in money, but in spirit. He loved a woman of strength, a practical angel. I had to become her one last time. There was only one source left, one person who had the means and the reason to help. The thought filled me with a shame deeper than any James had expressed. But love, my love, had become a tyrant. It demanded everything, With a trembling that started in my soul and radiated out to my very fingertips, I picked up the telephone, the old corded one that sat on the table beside Tom's chair. I did not call the bank. I dialed the number I knew by heart, the number for the Whirlwind, for my brilliant, busy daughter. The phone rang 1,000 miles away in a steel tower. When she answered, her voice was clipped, already halfway into her next thought. Mom, everything okay? Honey, I said, and my voice sounded strange to me, thin and airy with false brightness. I need to ask you a favor. Could you lend me some money? It's important. The silence on the other end was not the companionable silence of my house. It was a sharp, listening silence, the silence of a lawyer hearing a witness begin to crack. And in that silence, as I prepared to speak the words that would either unlock my future or destroy my past, I felt the final key turn, not in a storage unit padlock, but in the last locked chamber of my own heart. I was about to pay the ultimate price. The silence on the line, Sarah's silence, was a physical force. It wasn't the gentle, waiting quiet of my home. It was the dead air in a tapped phone line, the void after a detonation. I could hear the faint hum of her Chicago office, the distant echo of a world in motion, a world that had just ground to a halt for her. Mom. The word was a blade, sharp and wary. Are you okay? Is it the house? The medical bills? What do you need? Her voice had shed its professional crispness, revealing the raw, maternal bedrock beneath. It was the voice she'd used when I fell and broke my wrist, a decade ago, all urgency and controlled fear. This was it, the moment of revelation. A part of me, a small, cowardly part, wanted to lie, to say the roof was leaking, the furnace was dead. But the greater part of me, the part swollen with the sacred drama of my story, could not contain it any longer. This wasn't a shameful secret. It was a joyous bombshell I was finally ready to share. My voice, when it came, was laced with a breathless excitement that felt girlish and alien in my own ears. It's for James. I said his name like a password to paradise. There's a final holdup with his Condo Sela storage unit of all things, and if we can just cover this last fee, he can finally come. He'll pay you back as soon as he's here, of course, with interest. It's just to bridge the gap, honey. The final key. I could see it as I spoke. The gratitude in James's eyes. Sarah's initial surprise melting into happiness for me, the elegant transfer of funds that would solve everything. I was smiling. I realized my free hand was pressed to my chest, feeling the frantic, hopeful bird of my heart beating against my ribs. The silence returned, but it had changed. It had thickened, grown dense and cold. It was the silence of a courtroom after a damning piece of evidence is entered. I could almost hear her mind working. The connections firing, the terrible picture assembling itself with the brutal efficiency of a prosecutor. Mom, a single syllable, flat and heavy. Who is James? And so I told her, with the phone cradled between my shoulder and cheek, my hands gesturing to the empty room. I poured out the entire beautiful epic. I told her of the kind eyes on the screen, the shared loneliness that felt like kinship, the miracle of being loved again. I painted the watercolors of the Pacific Northwest, described the sunroom we'd designed, the sound of the ocean we would hear together. My voice gained momentum, painting our future in the vibrant, unassailable colors of absolute faith. I told her about the hurdles, yes, but I framed them as the trials that proved our devotion, the shared battles that made our victory sweeter. I was not a victim. I was a heroine in a late-life romance. I was beaming, my old face stretched with the telling tears of happy anticipation in the corners of my eyes. When I finished, there was not even the hum of the office. There was only a void a perfect, absolute stillness that stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then the sound. It was a raw, choked animal sound, a sob that seemed to tear itself from a place deeper than her throat. It was a sound of such pure, unadulterated agony that my smile froze, then shattered. "Oh, Mom." Her voice, when it came, was broken glass. No, 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 the words that followed didn't feel like words. They felt like blows. Short, brutal, factual. Scam, catfish, fake. The picture is stolen, Mom. The stories are made up. There is no James in Seattle. There is no condo, no lien, no storage unit. Her voice was gaining a terrible, hysterical strength. It's a script. They have scripts for people like you. They target loneliness. They take everything. Each sentence was a nail, each one hammered into the beautiful vessel I had built, splitting the polished hull, shattering the intricate carvings. "It's not real, Mom," she pleaded, her own voice breaking. "He's not real." The phone grew heavy, impossibly heavy. It was no longer a conduit for my joy. It was a cold, dead weight. I stared straight ahead, my eyes unfocused. Out the window, the bird feeder was empty, the gray sky pressed down. The digital picture frame cycled to a photo of Sarah on a mountain peak, her arms triumphant, her smile brilliant and 1,000,000 miles away. The warmth that had sustained me for 2 years drained from my body in an instant, leaving a coldness more profound than any winter. It leached from my face, my hands, my core. I felt myself turning. To stone, to ice, right there in Tom's old chair. "Mom, Mom, please say something." What was there to say? The story was over. The epic had been a pamphlet. The love of my twilight years was a phantom, a voice in a machine, a fiction crafted to pry open a vault. The future I had furnished with such detail was a stage set, and the only actor had just walked off, leaving me alone in the glare of a single cruel fluorescent light. "I have to go, Sarah," I whispered. The words were ash in my mouth. I didn't wait for her reply. With a gentleness that felt surreal, I lowered the handset back into its cradle. The click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door closing, not the door to a storage unit, the door to hope itself. And in the ringing silence that followed, I sat, a 92-year-old woman, holding the broken pieces of a miracle that never was, the second bereavement. The phone was a dead thing in my lap. Its plastic shell felt colder than the air in the room, a spent cartridge after the shot. I looked at my hands resting on it, the veins like faded blue rivers on a map, the skin thin as tissue paper over knuckles swollen with time. These hands had typed love letters to a ghost. They had signed wire. Transfer forms with a hopeful flourish. They had just now hung up on my daughter's devastation. I did not move. Moving would make it real. The silence after Sarah's call was different from any I had known. It wasn't the silence of waiting or of solitude or even of grief. It was the silence of a vacuum, a total, airless nullity. All the sound had been sucked out of the world, the imagined sound of his voice, the planned sound. Of the Pacific, the future sound of our shared laughter in a sunroom, gone, replaced by a ringing absence so complete it was a presence itself. I stared at the bird feeder outside the window, empty, a stark metal silhouette against the flat gray sky. For 2 years I had seen it as a charming detail in my life, something to describe to him. Now it was just a thing, a hollow thing. This grief was worse than the telegram. When Tom was taken, I was bereft of a person, a real, tangible, sweat and scent man whose absence was a raw, screaming wound. I grieved him, his smile, his touch, the future he embodied. This was a bereavement of a different order. I had not lost a man. I had lost the man, the future, the beloved, the entire architecture of meaning I had built over 2 years. But worse, far worse, I had lost the version of myself that had been beloved, the my dear Evelyn, the practical angel, the miracle. That woman, the one who woke up to a good morning message, who debated peony colors, who felt seen and cherished she had been murdered as surely as if shot, and I was left here in this chair with the corpse of that hopeful self. I was the foolish old widow, the easy mark, the humiliation arrived then, hot and slick, rising up my throat. It wasn't a gentle flush of embarrassment. It was a visceral, scalding wave. It burned away the last lingering tendrils of the dream. I saw it all now, not through the soft focus lens of love, but in the harsh clinical light of truth. The delays, the crises, the photos, the bruised temple in the hospital bed, the grainy storage unit door. They were props. I had been the rapt, believing audience of a one-woman show, paying for my own deception. I had recited my lines with perfect faith. I had built the set with my own money. I had loved a shadow on a wall and called it sunrise. A dry, heaving sound escaped me, but no tears came. My eyes felt parched, scraped clean. I was beyond tears. This was the desert that came after the flood. I looked slowly around my living room, at Tom's chair, at his photograph, my monuments. For 2 years, I had believed I was adding a new wing to the museum. I had believed James was pulling up a chair beside Tom's. Now I saw the truth. I had been alone the entire time, talking to the empty air, while a stranger in a dark room typed words designed to pick the lock on my life savings. The love I had felt, so profound, so real, so physical in its joy, had been a chemical reaction in my own brain, expertly triggered by a predator. It was the ultimate violation. They hadn't just taken my money. They had reached inside my chest, into the most sacred, guarded chamber of my heart, and they had mimicked the beating I had been waiting a lifetime to hear again. They had made a mockery of my loneliness, my loyalty, my capacity to love. Sarah was on a plane now, coming to manage the crisis, to handle her foolish, senile mother. The thought was a fresh agony. My brilliant, capable daughter, who dealt in facts and evidence, would have to clean up the wreckage of a fairy tale. I had become her problem, her burden, the very thing I had spent a lifetime trying not to be. I sat there as the gray afternoon light began to fail, leaching the color from the room. The second bereavement settled into my bones, colder and heavier than the first. When I lost Tom, I lost my past and my present. When I lost James, I lost my future, and with it I lost the last precious shred of my own dignity. The silence was no longer waiting with me. It had simply consumed me. I was a fossil, embedded in the stone of my own shame, waiting for the world to come and excavate the ruin. The theft let them have the money. The thought emerged from the cold silt at the bottom of my consciousness, clear and calm. The $45,000, let it be gone. What was it really? Paper, numbers in a ledger, the carefully hoarded physical residue of a life of caution. It was the shell left behind after the living thing, the hope, the love had been sucked out. The money was the least of what they took. They took the good morning messages, those delicate digital flowers that bloomed on my screen each dawn, convincing me the world held a specific personal kindness for me. They took the sound of a voice I'd never actually heard, but had imagined so completely, a warm, steady baritone that said my name like it was a precious artifact. They took the plans, the meticulous, joyful architecture of our maybe tomorrow, the blue shutters, the birdseed for goldfinches, the specific stretch of Oregon coast where the waves were supposed to be tallest. They took the phantom weight of a wedding band on my finger, a sensation I had imagined so vividly I could almost feel the cool metal, They took the feeling of being chosen. After decades of being the one left behind, the one waiting, the one who was spoken for by a ghost, I had felt selected, plucked from the endless line of the lonely and told I was a miracle. They turned that sacred selection into a transaction, and in doing so, they poisoned the well of my own self-regard. Most of all, they took the story, the beautiful, sustaining story I had told myself for 2 years, the narrative of second chances, of love's stubborn persistence, of a final, glorious chapter. It was a story that had given order and meaning to my quiet days, that had turned my loneliness from a sentence into a prologue. They reached into my mind and rewrote the ending, scrawling fool in thick black ink across the final page. The barren truth they left in its place was a vast, flat, empty plain. There was no James driving across the country, no reunion at the airport, no tearful, laughing embrace, no shared sunset over a foreign sea. There was only this, an old woman in a silent house with less money and more shame. The humiliation had passed, leaving a strange, hollow detachment. I watched it all from a distance, as if it had happened to someone else, a character in a very sad, very predictable movie. I felt a pang for her, that foolish old woman who believed in kindness. Sarah would be here soon. She would take charge. She would speak to the bank, perhaps to the police. She would use words like fraud and elder abuse and recovery. She would try to get the money back. She would treat the symptoms, but she could not recover the stolen fiction. She could not arrest the phantom or prosecute the ghost. She could not give me back the 2 years I had spent living inside a beautiful lie. The tablet lay dark on the coffee table. James was gone from it, erased by Sarah's swift, distant commands. But he was everywhere in the room. He was in the empty space where my future used to be. He was in the new, profound silence that understood it would never again be broken by a loving ping. He was in the withering of my own spirit, a flower that had bloomed in the light of a fall sun and could not survive the return of the gray. They had stolen the money with clinical efficiency, but the theft of the dream that was an act of vandalism. They hadn't just taken a thing. They had shattered the container, making it impossible to ever hold hope in quite the same way again. I looked over at Tom's photograph, his steady, youthful gaze. For the first time, I felt not comfort, but a flicker of something like shame before him. I had tried to add a chair beside his. I had tried to build a new room onto the museum of our love, and in my desperation, I had let a vandal through the door. The final, cruelest theft was this. They made my cherished past feel foolish, too. They cast a sneering light on all of it, the loyalty, the fidelity, the decades of silence kept for a memory. In their scheme, all love was a currency to be counterfeited, and I had been the eager, bankrupt bank. Let them have the money. It was already spent. It had purchased the temporary, glorious illusion of a destination. Now I was back at the station, alone, with no ticket left, watching the empty tracks gleam dully under a moonless sky. The train I thought I was boarding had never existed at all. The empty future Sarah arrives in a storm of purpose. The key turns in the lock not with the gentle hesitation of a guest, but with the decisive ownership of a crisis manager. She fills the silent house with sound the whisk of her wool coat, the firm tap of her heels on the hardwood, the hurried, tense explanations to someone on her phone. Yes, yes, power of attorney is already on file. I'll be there first thing. Yes, fraud division. She sees me in the chair, and her face, so like her father's in its bone structure, collapses for a single, unguarded moment into pure anguish. Then the lawyer's mask snaps back into place, practical and fierce. Oh, Mom! She crosses the room in 3 strides, kneeling before me, taking my cold hands in her warm ones. Her touch is electric with life and urgency. We'll fix this. We'll get it all back. I've already frozen everything. We'll get someone on it. I look at her, my brilliant daughter. Her eyes are red-rimmed from crying on the plane, but they are sharp, scanning my face for damage. She is here to fix the ledger, to balance the accounts. She does not yet understand that the ledger she needs to fix is not at the bank. It's inside me, and the columns are all zeros. The tablet, I say, my voice a dry rustle. It's the first thing I've said since her arrival. I shut it all down remotely from the airport, she says, her jaw tight. The profiles, the accounts. He's gone. She says he like it's a foul taste in her mouth, a pronoun for a virus. He's gone. The finality of it, spoken aloud, is a cold stone dropped into the well of me. There is no more blue light, no more ping. The hearth is extinguished, and the room is already growing cold. Sarah bustles. She makes tea I don't drink. She confiscates the tablet, tucking it into her briefcase like evidence. She calls the home health service and tells them not to come. That family is here. She is taking control, and I am letting her. I am a passive country willingly occupied after a catastrophic war. That night, in my narrow bed, I listened to the unfamiliar sounds of her moving in the guest room, the murmur of another late-night call, the creak of the floorboards. The house, for the first time in years, holds the breath of another living soul, and the silence between us is a chasm filled with everything unsaid, her guilt for not seeing, my shame for not knowing. The next morning, over toast she's made, she lays out the plan, the bank, the police report, the possibility of tracing the wires. Her words are competent, logical, a map of the practical world. I nod at the appropriate intervals. She is building a case as she has been trained to do, but her case is about the theft of money. My evidence, the stolen future, the vandalized story is inadmissible in her court. She goes out to run her errands of reclamation. The silence returns, but it is different now. It is no longer my familiar, if painful, companion. It is a silence observed, judged. It is the silence of a crime scene after the investigators have left for the day. I walk slowly to the living room. Tom's photograph is there, his smile eternal, untarnished by my foolishness. But the new chair I had imagined beside his is gone, revealed as a trick of the light. The museum feels smaller, dingier, a neglected hall of relics, its sole visitor now a figure of pity. I look out the window at the empty bird feeder. Sarah will likely fill it before she leaves. She will order a service to maintain it. She will provide abundantly. The future stretches before me, not in years perhaps, but in days, in mornings and afternoons. It is empty of plans. The trip to the coast is a ghost. The sunroom is a figment. The sound of a key in the lock, his key, will never come. This is the true theft, and there is no recovering it. They did not just steal my money. They stole my next, and at 92 there are so few necks left to steal. They took the last best one. I will be cared for. I will be safe. Sarah will see to that. My physical needs will be met with an efficiency that would have stunned my younger, struggling self. But the need that was met for 2 glorious, terrible years, the need to be beloved, to be seen as a woman, not a responsibility, that need has been exposed, exploited, and left to bleed out on the floor of my own heart. The empty future is not a space of possibility. It is a room I have already lived in, whose dimensions I know by heart. The loneliness that returns is not the old familiar one. It is a new model, upgraded with the knowledge of its own price tag. It comes with the memory of a voice that never was, and the crushing weight of a love that never existed. I sit in the chair, the one that truly is empty, and I wait, not for a message or a knock or a miracle. I simply wait for the next thing to happen, for Sarah to return, for the tea to grow cold. For the digital frame to click to another image of a world that moves on, always on, while I remain here in the quiet, perfect monument of my own making, its final and most permanent exhibit, myself. And so my story ends not with a journey to the Pacific, but here in the familiar quiet of my own living room, the phantom has been banished, the ledger of loss closed with a final, devastating sum. My daughter's love is a fierce, protective fortress around me now, built of vigilance and phone calls and monitored accounts. The world in its way has been made safe again, but safety, I have learned, is not the same as wholeness. A heart can be secure in its cage and still feel the ache of the sky it once believed it could fly in. I share this story with you not for your pity, but for your protection. My face is one you might pass in the grocery store. My life one you might assume is simple, finished. But loneliness has no age limit, and hope is a virus that can infect anyone at any time. The hands that type these cruel deceptions are not targeting greed. They are targeting the fundamental human need to be seen, to be cherished, to believe that our story still has a beautiful twist left. So, from my quiet chair to your busy world, I say this. Talk to the elders in your life, not just about their health or their finances, but about their days. Ask about the small things. Listen to their stories, the real ones filled with dust and glory. Your attention is the most potent shield against the predator who offers counterfeit. Connection. A shared laugh over a cup of tea is a stronger firewall than any scam alert. And to anyone feeling that quiet take, that sense that life has passed you by, please, before you send a penny, share a thought. Share it with a friend, a child, a neighbor. Let a real human voice speak into your silence before you trust a scripted one on a screen. Thank you for listening to my story. It is a painful one, but if its telling prevents even one other heart from being picked clean by vultures disguised as doves, then some purpose will have been salvaged from the wreckage. Share it with a friend, with your family. Let my lesson be their armor. The world is still full of real love, real connection. It is often quieter and closer than we think. Don't let a phantom steal your chance to find it. Yours in hope for a wiser world, Evelyn.